Every culture has it. Every generation inherits it. And billions of people spend their lives searching for it. Marriage. It feels so natural that most of us never stop to ask a simple question: why does it exist at all? The answer most people give sounds obvious. Because two people fall in love. Because they want to spend their lives together. Because that's what humans have always done. Except history says otherwise. For thousands of years, love wasn't the reason people got married. Power was. Survival was. Property was. In many ancient societies, a bride and groom didn't choose each other. Their families did. Some couples met for the first time on their wedding day. Others were promised to one another while they were still children. Kings exchanged sons and daughters to prevent wars. Wealthy families used marriage to protect fortunes. Entire kingdoms rose, or collapsed, because of a single wedding. If marriage wasn't built on romance, why did nearly every civilization create it? How could one tradition survive thousands of years, countless wars, changing religions, and the rise and fall of empires? The answer takes us far beyond churches, wedding rings, and legal contracts. It begins in a world with no cities. No money. No written laws. Only small groups of humans struggling to survive in one of the most dangerous environments our species has ever faced. Back then, the greatest challenge wasn't finding true love. It was keeping children alive. That single problem forced our ancestors to cooperate in ways no other species had before. Over thousands of generations, those partnerships evolved into customs. Those customs became traditions. And eventually, one of the most powerful institutions in human history. Today, we're uncovering the real reason humans invented marriage. Why it had almost nothing to do with love. How it shaped civilizations across the globe. And why understanding its origins changes the way we see one of humanity's oldest traditions. Because marriage didn't simply change relationships. It helped build civilization itself. Forget everything you associate with marriage today. No white dresses. No wedding rings. No legal documents. No religious ceremonies. Travel back more than 100,000 years, and none of those traditions existed. Our ancestors lived in small bands of hunters and gatherers, constantly moving across landscapes that offered no guarantees. Food could disappear overnight. Seasons changed without warning. Predators waited beyond the edge of every campfire. Each sunrise presented a new challenge. Under those conditions, surviving to adulthood was an achievement. Raising a child was even harder. Human babies are unlike the offspring of almost every other mammal. A newborn gazelle can stand within minutes. Young horses begin walking almost immediately. Even many primates become independent relatively quickly. Human infants are different. They can't walk. They can't feed themselves. They can't even hold up their own heads. For years, they depend almost entirely on the people around them. That extraordinary vulnerability created one of evolution's greatest puzzles. How could a species with such helpless offspring survive long enough to dominate the planet? The answer wasn't stronger muscles. It wasn't sharper teeth. It was cooperation. One adult alone struggled to provide everything a growing child needed. Food had to be gathered. Shelters had to be built. Danger had to be avoided. At the same time, infants required constant care and protection. Working together dramatically increased the chances that children would survive. Over countless generations, natural selection rewarded groups that cooperated more effectively than their rivals. Those stronger social bonds became one of humanity's greatest evolutionary advantages. Notice something important, though. These weren't marriages. There were no official ceremonies. No written promises. No governments recording relationships. What existed were long-term partnerships built around a practical goal: keeping the next generation alive. Anthropologists believe these partnerships gradually became more stable because stability offered enormous benefits. Children learned from both adults. Resources could be shared more efficiently. Illness or injury no longer meant immediate disaster if another adult could step in. A family became more than a group of related individuals. It became a survival system. That system proved remarkably successful. As thousands of years passed, humans expanded into new environments across Africa, Europe, Asia, and eventually the rest of the world. Communities grew larger. Knowledge accumulated. Cooperation became increasingly sophisticated. Then came one of the biggest turning points in human history. People stopped constantly moving. Instead of following migrating animals, they began planting crops. Instead of temporary camps, they built permanent homes. Agriculture changed everything. For the first time, families could produce more food than they immediately needed. Surpluses appeared. Land became valuable. Livestock represented wealth. Homes could be passed from one generation to the next. Suddenly, relationships carried consequences far beyond raising children. Ownership entered the picture. And ownership introduced an entirely new problem. If someone spent decades building a farm, who inherited it after they died? Without clear answers, disputes could tear communities apart. Arguments over land, animals, and property threatened the stability that early societies depended on. Humanity needed a solution that everyone could recognize and trust. That solution would become one of civilization's oldest institutions. Marriage was no longer just about cooperation. It was about creating order in an increasingly complicated world. Imagine you're a farmer living nearly 5,000 years ago. You own fertile land. Your family has spent decades clearing fields, building irrigation channels, raising livestock, and storing grain for difficult seasons. Everything you possess represents years of exhausting work. Now imagine something unexpected happens. You die. One question immediately confronts everyone left behind. Who owns everything now? Without agreed-upon rules, the answer could spark endless conflict. Children might compete against relatives. Neighbors could claim land that wasn't theirs. Entire communities could fracture over inheritance alone. As villages expanded into cities, these disputes became impossible to ignore. Civilizations needed a system that clearly identified family relationships, responsibilities, and legal heirs. Marriage became one of the most effective solutions ever created. It established recognized households. It identified parents. It clarified inheritance. Most importantly, it reduced uncertainty. Once those rules existed, communities became easier to organize. Taxes could be collected. Property could be transferred. Family obligations became easier to enforce. Marriage wasn't merely a private relationship. It became one of society's earliest legal institutions. Across Mesopotamia, ancient Egypt, China, India, Greece, and Rome, different cultures developed their own marriage traditions. The ceremonies varied. The customs varied. The religious beliefs certainly varied. Yet the underlying purpose remained remarkably similar. Marriage created social stability. It connected families through shared obligations. It protected wealth across generations. It strengthened alliances between powerful households. In many cases, love barely entered the conversation. Parents often negotiated marriages years before the ceremony took place. The decision wasn't based on romance. It was based on strategy. Would this marriage unite two influential families? Would it secure farmland? Would it strengthen political alliances? Would it protect future generations? Those practical questions shaped countless marriages throughout history. Royal families took this idea even further. A single wedding could end decades of conflict. Two kingdoms might become allies overnight because a prince married a princess from a neighboring empire. Some historians even argue that certain wars never happened because marriage prevented them. Others began because those alliances collapsed. In that sense, weddings sometimes influenced history as much as battles. Even ordinary families viewed marriage through a practical lens. Life expectancy was lower than it is today. Disease remained common. Crop failures could destroy livelihoods within months. Choosing a reliable partner wasn't simply desirable. It often determined whether an entire household survived. That doesn't mean people never experienced love. They absolutely did. Ancient poems celebrated romance. Songs described heartbreak. Stories explored passion, longing, and devotion. Human emotions haven't changed very much over thousands of years. What changed was the purpose of marriage itself. For most of history, love and marriage existed alongside one another. But they weren't always the same thing. Only much later would those two ideas gradually merge. And when they finally did, marriage became something humanity had never expected it to be. Not simply a contract. Not merely a survival strategy. But a relationship expected to provide both security and happiness. That transformation would completely redefine one of civilization's oldest traditions. For most of human history, marriage answered practical questions. Who raises the children? Who inherits the land? Who protects the family? Who strengthens the community? Romance was often secondary. Then society began changing. Trade expanded across continents. Cities grew larger. Education became more common. People gained more freedom to make their own choices. Slowly, a new idea emerged. Maybe individuals should choose their own partners. Maybe personal happiness should matter. At first, that idea sounded almost radical. For thousands of years, marriage had primarily served families, kingdoms, and economic interests. Now, more people wanted marriage to serve the people getting married. The Industrial Revolution accelerated that shift. As millions moved from farms to cities, they became less dependent on large extended families. Workers could earn their own income. Young adults gained more independence than previous generations had ever experienced. For the first time in history, large numbers of people could realistically choose a spouse based on personal preference rather than family strategy. Literature helped push the change even further. Novels celebrated romantic love. Poets praised emotional connection. Eventually, movies, music, and popular culture turned love into one of humanity's most powerful ideals. By the 20th century, many people no longer viewed marriage as a contract between families. They viewed it as a partnership between two individuals. That transformation was extraordinary. In a relatively short period of history, marriage changed from an institution designed primarily for survival and stability into one expected to provide love, friendship, trust, emotional support, and lifelong companionship. Few human traditions have changed so dramatically while remaining so recognizable. Yet the older purpose never completely disappeared. Even today, marriage still carries legal, economic, and social consequences. It affects inheritance, taxes, property ownership, parental rights, medical decisions, citizenship in many countries. The romantic version of marriage sits on top of a much older foundation. That's why marriage has survived for so long. It keeps adapting. When economies changed, marriage changed. When religions changed, marriage changed. When governments changed, marriage changed. And as human expectations continue changing, marriage continues changing with them. Around the world, people now see marriage in very different ways. Some view it primarily as a spiritual commitment. Others see it as a legal partnership. Many see it as a celebration of love. For others, family traditions remain equally important. Despite those differences, one remarkable pattern remains. Nearly every society still creates long-term family bonds. Not because evolution demanded wedding ceremonies, but because stable cooperation has always benefited human communities. The rituals may differ. The laws may change. The expectations may evolve. Yet the underlying idea remains surprisingly consistent. Humans thrive when they work together. And marriage became one of civilization's most enduring ways of encouraging that cooperation. The next time you see a wedding, it's easy to assume you're witnessing a tradition built entirely on love. But hidden beneath the flowers, the vows, and the celebration lies a much older story. A story that began long before churches, governments, or written laws existed. Marriage wasn't invented in a palace. It wasn't created by a king. And it certainly didn't begin as a fairy tale. It emerged from one of humanity's oldest challenges. How do we raise children who need years of care? How do we share resources? How do we build stable communities that can survive from one generation to the next? Over thousands of years, the answer evolved. What started as a practical survival strategy gradually became something far more personal. Today, Many people expect marriage to provide love, friendship, trust, emotional support, partnership, and lifelong commitment, all at the same time. That would have sounded almost unimaginable to many of our ancestors. And perhaps that's the most fascinating part of the entire story. Marriage wasn't invented because humans discovered love. It survived because humans kept reinventing it. As civilization changed, marriage changed with it. Empires rose and fell. Religions spread. Economies transformed. Yet marriage adapted to each new world it encountered. Whether its future looks exactly the same or completely different, its history reveals one extraordinary truth. Some of humanity's most powerful institutions weren't designed all at once. They evolved. One generation at a time. Just like humanity itself.